Hi, I'm Alan Hedblum. Welcome to our show, a place to feel like you belong. Our next guest stands tall in the community, and not just because he wears cowboy boots and a 10-gallon hat. Roberto Torres is child of migrant farm workers, a former U.S. Marine, and community organizer with a passion for economic development. It's our great pleasure to welcome to the studio today Roberto Torres, brand new Executive Director of the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan. Roberto, welcome to Feel Like You Belong.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. I do. In such a short period of time, I've felt very welcomed here in Western Michigan.
Well, that's the aim of our community. That's what defines community, as we talked about last night.
It really is.
At the gala event, sure. So at an event for the commemoration of Cesar Chavez a week or two ago, you were introduced to the new community, and you talked very proudly about your campesino roots. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was actually for me, it was kind of like a walk back memory lane. You know, when I think about Cesar Chavez as a child, I was part of the boycott movement. I remember the chant, boycott lettuce, boycott grapes, boycott the wine that Gallo makes. And I was waving the UFW flag. You know, I'm one of 13 in my family. So my parents are from Coahuila, Mexico. And my father did the migrant track up California, Oregon, Washington, then came around into the northern U.S. and so settled in Northwest Ohio, and continued the migrant, if you will, the migrant mainstream. And so I grew up in the camps. And so at a very young age, I knew what camp life was about. And so having, you know, 7 brothers and sisters that I grew up with, one right after the other, you know, we learned to get along with very little. Mm-hmm. And it was an impoverished life, but it was very rich in culture, very rich in language, and very rich in family. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about Cesar Chavez, I think about some of the things that can be accomplished in spite of having challenges and struggles. And that's really what my life has been. And I give a lot of credit to my parents and the hard work ethic of a migrant worker. The hard work ethic that's been able to get me as far as I've come.
And to remind you of those roots, you keep something in your office.
Yes, I do. Actually, if you notice at the march, I actually had the folks who are wearing the black and red of the UFW, the Farm Workers Union. I was wearing the red and black of the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. I'm a member of FLOC, and FLOC is my good friend Valdemar Velasquez is the president of FLOC. It's a national organization, a community organized organization, a grassroots, it's a grassroots farm worker organization. So still tied to my roots very much. And so, yeah, when I was a child, this was very familiar to me. You know, I've got a friend.
So what is this?
This is what we call a hamper. This is our pickle hamper. So I used to pick cucumbers with this, and so in a lot of the camps of Northwest Ohio and even into Michigan. And so I picked everything from cherries to tomatoes to watermelon to onions.
How heavy would one of these get when it's full of produce? Because produce is mostly water. So
well, it depends on how old you are. So it's very heavy when you're a kid, and the older one gets, the lighter it is. Okay. But you know, I got to tell you something. With tomatoes, we used to use wooden hampers. And I tell people, I said, I got very good at math because I used to do calculations on wooden hampers. So even as a child, because I had to account for the volume and the end of the day payroll, I was the one that was charged with doing that. So even out in the fields, we were doing math and
applied mathematics.
I did that very well.
Absolutely. Well, going back to your childhood and thinking about your education, I know you're an avid reader now. How did you get started reading?
It's because I hated reading. You know, as a child growing up, and especially just speaking Spanish first, so my native language is español. Era mi primer idioma. So that's what I learned how to speak at home. That's what we spoke in the community. And so we went to school, we were at a deficit. And so a lot of times we had an accent and kids would make fun of it. And so I often got into trouble because of that, because I would get angry and I would fight. And we would have this little exercise that we did in school, and it was you stood next to the desk, the teacher gave you a word, and then you had to spell it. If you spelled it, got it right, you got to stand. If you got it wrong, you had to sit down. And so every time I would go to attempt, whether I knew it or not, my accent, the kids would laugh. And so it got to be a very negative exercise for me. So I didn't like reading, I didn't like spelling. But then at one point in my life, my uncle saw me reading this one book. It was a magazine. He saw me reading, and he saw that I was very enthralled in it. And he noticed that I really liked the book. So he said, "Do you like that, mijo?" And I said, "Yes." And mijo is a very endearing term in the Latino community, my son. And I said, "Yes, deal." And so he comes out with a big box of these magazines, and he gives them to me. And then all summer, I kept reading the magazines and the stories in there. There had a section for word power, where you got a word and you associate it with a definition. Then you got to go back and answer it. So I did that. There was a word puzzle, so I did that. There was military humor, and I enjoyed that, so I read that. So I was really liking this magazine, so he gave me this entire book. Well, all summer long, I kept tagging along with that book, and even when we played baseball, I had in my back pocket that kids started calling me Digest, because it was Reader's Digest. And so my nickname from then on was Digest, and when people introduced me, they would say, "That's that smart kid Digest." And so all of a sudden, the pressure was on to become, to become very proficient.
You have to live into that nickname.
Yeah, I did. It was now a new label that I was given, and so since then, reading has been a passion, and
And you eventually read a biography, I believe, about a famous.
I did. I was a freshman in high school, and I tell the students this all the time about reading and the power of reading and the power of being an accomplished individual. So it was a book about a young man who had graduated from Harvard. He was a councilman over in San Antonio, and he aspired to actually be the first Latino mayor of any major U.S. city. So he was running for mayor of San Antonio, and so he had this autobiography out. His name was Henry Cisneros. And so I read about it in high school, and I said, here's a guy that's very accomplished, on his way to becoming mayor, and he's like me. He's Hispanic, like me. And I thought, we're not only made for being out in the, in the fields, or being laborers. There are other options for us. And so he went on to become mayor of San Antonio. So as I went through school and I graduated and started working for several cities, I was at an appointment in the city of Toledo working for the mayor's office when the mayor came to me and said, "Roberto, we've got an invitation from the Secretary of HUD, who is going to be coming into Toledo, and he'd like us to arrange a luncheon for him." The Secretary of HUD at that time under President Clinton was Henry Cisneros. And so I got to actually meet Henry for the first time at the city of Toledo over lunch. He then invited us over into Washington, D.C., where I met him several other times. I met him during America's Promise. I met him during President Obama's election campaign. And
did you ever have a chance to tell him that he was an inspiration?
I told him that. I finally got the opportunity to tell him that. We were at the University of Akron. He was a keynote speaker at the University of Akron. It was himself, myself, and Doc Proenza, who was the president of Akron. It was a room full of about 1,000 people and only 3 Hispanics. And it was the keynote speaker, myself, and the president of the university. And so Henry joked about it after the presentation. He said, "Now, I'd like to call all the Hispanics that are in the room up to the front so that we could take a picture." It was just us 3, right? It was just us 3. So as we're sitting there taking the picture, I said, "Henry, I got to tell you something." I said, "I've seen you in Philadelphia, I've seen you in D.C., you've come to Toledo, and I've never shared this with you." I said, "But you've been my hero since I was in high school." And I said, "There was a book that you did. It's an autobiography when you were running for office." He was floored. And ever since then, whenever he saw me, he says, "Toledo, Toledo." And so the last time I saw him was several years ago during the second re-election campaign for Obama. I was then leading the campaign over in Cleveland, and he was the surrogate for the national campaign. And so we sat down. At that time, he was doing housing development throughout the country, and I was doing economic development. And so we shared a story, and I'll share a photo with you. We were actually at lunch talking about doing a development project together. And I tell students, I said, that kid who this was his life. Mm-hmm. That's what he did growing up. And he only imagined, the best that he could imagine was being a foreman out in the fields. And yet here's this young man who is now meeting somebody that he read about in 9th grade and is actually doing a project with him.
Because he picked up books and magazines
Right,
and
right.
made learning part of his life.
Yes, yes.
Sure. I'd like to fast forward a little bit to you were doing economic development work in Toledo, and then you got a call to come to West Michigan and work in your new position. Tell us, what is so special about immigrant-based entrepreneurship?
Well, it's the way of the future for a lot of communities. One of my mentors in economic development, Stu Lichter, is an international developer. He takes vacant military bases and he turns them into multi-use facilities. We did a project with Goodyear when I was over in Canton, and he did Goodyear headquarters. So he uses international investment as a way to complete the projects. When I was in Canton, Ohio, after I left Toledo, I went to Canton, Ohio, and I was the director of economic development. It was in 2008 and 2009, and that's the worst time. If you want to do development, the worst time to go do development is during that time.
Especially in the Midwest.
Yes, everything crashed. Everything crashed. Nobody was lending. No one was willing to take a risk. But the gentleman that called me up, the mayor at that time, was very international himself, and he was looking for somebody who could possibly think of international investment. And so he asked me to help him out with that, and we started doing sister cities on the economic development side. And so when I was in Canton, Ohio, during a time when everybody else was not growing, this is my construction helmet, which was given to me. And I wore this at various groundbreakings and during various construction projects. This actually represents, in the course of 4 years, $1.8 billion in development. $1.8 billion in development. The largest job creation project that Northeast Ohio experienced in years was a Chinese company that we brought in out of Beijing, China. And when we had met with the governor, Governor Kasich back then, they had proposed 1,250 jobs. When I spoke to the mayor not long ago last year, he said they had already hired 1,000 and they were on record to hire another 600. So 1,600 jobs. That turns a community over.
Absolutely.
And that happened because international investment was allowed to actually come in and give jobs to local citizens. And so when I think about Western Michigan, the opportunity here is tremendous because you have a very progressive community, you have a very strong economic community, you have a strong philanthropic community, you have a very growing immigrant population, so that's booming. And then you also have elected officials, or you have a body of government that knows how to let development move on. Oftentimes you get a lot of politics that get in the way, and those efforts stifle development. In this case, Grand Rapids doesn't have that. And so that's the opportunity. Now, my excitement at the Hispanic Center is how are we able to then mobilize our Latino community to become part of the solution to this economic opportunity that Western Michigan presents.
That's
and that's that really excites me. And I got to tell you, Alan, the same way that I've been received by you, it's the same way I've been received by every entity, whether it's education, business, the elected leadership here in this community. So it presents a great opportunity for our community.
Well, you're clearly bringing in a lot of passion and some experience, and those are two elements that we can certainly need, because indeed community development needs all hands on deck.
Well,
so it's really inspiring. Yeah. But before we wrap up, because our time is drawing short, part of your history is having been in the Marines, and you're no longer active, but once a Marine, always a Marine.
Correct.
Tell me, just in a nutshell, what did that teach you?
In the Corps, the first motto is always faithful. So you're always faithful to country, you're always faithful to Corps, you're always faithful to family, you're always faithful. So that motto about having a goal, then sticking to that goal till you get that goal completed, has served me well.
I'm guessing that really engenders this whole core notion of trust.
Yes, and it's one where you need to let people know what your values are. You need to let people know what you're all about, because that's what you're going to move forward with.
Any working relationship needs that. Yeah. You need to rely on. You need to trust.
And you need to be able to be a leader. So in other words, you don't wait for projects to happen. you take projects and then you make it happen, and you build a team around you. So regardless of what walk of life people come from, everybody has a value, everybody has an asset that they can contribute. And it's true, you know, you're as strong as your weakest link. So what you need to do is you need to take everyone in and make sure that everyone has the ability to move step by step, as we did when we were in boot camp. And so I think that Marine philosophy has played well for me in not only community development but project development.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for stopping by the studio and telling the community a little bit more what you're about and some of your visions for the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan and cooperation with various elements of the community. Because I think it's going to be a great ride, and I wish you the best in that.
Well, thank you, Alan. You know, I'm gonna leave with one saying that I've heard you mention at times, and was also something that was near and dear to the migrant movement, and that was, you know, Cesar Chavez called that "si se puede," and it certainly can. It certainly can be done. It's being done every day in different communities in different ways, and what we need to do is now do it collectively as one community. And immigration investment and growth in our community through the immigrant experience can be done. Si se puede.
Si se puede. On that note, we're going to say thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you, sir.
And to everyone watching back home, stay tuned. We'll be coming back shortly with some tips on American English, American culture, and a little American humor. We've all been in this public situation. Some person, a coworker, a client, or a stranger has something wrong with his or her appearance. You notice that he has food in his beard. The tag on the back of her blouse is sticking up. What do you do? What do you say? There are two ways of thinking about this problem. One way is, it's not my problem. I won't say anything. The second way asks, would I want someone to tell me if I were in this situation? My niece told me a now funny story about an embarrassment that happened to her. A while ago, she was working in an office building and went to use the restroom. Upon leaving the women's room, she failed to notice that she had tucked part of her dress into the top of her pantyhose. She spent the next hour working without noticing something was wrong. Finally, a customer pointed out her wardrobe malfunction, something that she was both horrified and grateful to learn. If, like my niece, your answer to the above question is, yes, I would want to be told, there are specific ways to express what's wrong in English. Here are 5 awkward situations that sometimes happen. Some of them have happened to you. Do you know the proper English words to alert someone to this situation? How about this situation? What about this one? Or this one? And this last one. What do you say in English for this? I suggest you share these situations with your American friends and ask whether they would point out any of them to someone in public. Maybe it depends on who is involved, a close friend versus a stranger versus your boss. This can be an interesting conversation. If you are the kind of person to speak up, remember to practice using these new warning sentences. We've put them up on our What's Up page. And before you head out the door today, check yourself in the mirror.